Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of Talking Away the Taboo. I am really thrilled today to be bringing you the story of my friend, my colleague friend, however you want to call her. We are going to be talking with Elana Frank. Elana is the CEO of Jewish Fertility Foundation, which is an incredible organization that really does so many things. To not discuss Jewish Fertility Foundation, we're here, Elana's going to be coming on, we're here to talk about Elana's personal story and the story of her son that she has through an embryo donation. Let me grab her. All right, Elana, come on in. Welcome to technology, everyone. Sometimes it takes a little bit for it to happen. I see that you're here. Let's see if we can get you on. If anybody has any questions for Elana, this is the place to do it. You can drop it right here. Elana's going to be sharing. She has actually an incredible story, and she's also going to be telling us pieces about what her son feels about it. I think her son is 6, 7, 10, something like that. And we're going to be hearing about some of his perspectives as well. Elana, I am inviting you a whole bunch. Oh, it says you're unable to join. Okay, coming. Okay, fine, no problem. Okay, we're just gonna hang until she's ready. Not until she's ready. I'm sure it's a tech issue because tech stuff happens all the time. Welcome to social media. Virtual stuff doesn't happen the way it's supposed to all the times that it should. This series, this conversation actually that we're having today is part of an entire series of programming that we're doing this week on donor conception. We've been talking about all kinds of things related to donors in terms of how to pick a donor, how to think about it, the grief that you might feel when you find out that you need to use a donor. What kinds of questions do you need to ask yourself, ask your doctor? What do you need to think about as you're choosing a donor? And then we've been sharing different perspectives from different people. So we had the perspectives of people who've used egg donors. Today, we are going to be interviewing Elana, who's going to be talking to us about embryo donation. And we have another personal story from an embryo person who used embryo donation coming up later. And then next week, we're going to move into sperm donation, lots of personal stories for that. And also, we're going to be having stories. Here we go. I think you're here. I hope. Then we're also going to be having a bunch of personal stories, accounts from people who are donor conceived. Here we go. People who are donor conceived who are going to be sharing their experiences as well. So this is today's embryo donation day. So hi, Elana, how are you?
I'm good. Why wasn't my account working? Wow. You're the Instagram expert. I gave my personal account, which I barely use.
I was going to say, welcome to the nonsense of technology. You would think that we all have it down, right? And, you know, it likes to surprise us just because it can. It's all good. It's all good. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Yes, you are the CEO of Jewish Fertility Foundation, which is an absolutely incredible organization. But we're not here today to talk about JFF. I want to hear. You've shared your personal journey with us before, but for those people who don't know your personal journey, can you give us the arc of your fertility experience, and then what eventually led you to embryo donation?
Sure. So I always talk about my journey kind of in two parts. My first part started after I got married. My husband and I made Aliyah. We went on to think we were going to have 1 million babies. Who knew back 15 years ago something like infertility would affect our lives? I didn't even know the word. And I was really, really lucky to be living in Israel when I was advocating for trying to have a baby. I quickly went to a doctor and got Clomid, which of course didn't work. I then started doing IUIs in the basement of a private doctor's home. who was recommended by my aunt in Israel. I mean, months and months go by.
I was gonna say, I just have to stop you for a second because I've heard you tell your story a whole bunch of times, and every time I hear you, like, oh yeah, I did IUI in the basement of it, I'm like, oh my God, like I can't even.
It was crazy. My husband, I mean, listen, my aunt who worked in the medical system, who I finally confided in, you know, she said to me, well, you probably don't know how to have sex. You need to go on a vacation. Like these things actually happened. And I think back years and years now. But she also worked in the medical system in Israel. And so she is on Instagram. So she is probably not listening. But, and she said, listen, I think you need to go relax and take a vacation. But let me give you this guy's number. He's a big professor in Israel, he runs a hospital IVF program. Call him. He can take you as a private client. We're American, so we didn't have a problem writing a check. I wanted a baby. And so we would go to his house an hour away from mine at like 8:30 at night. I remember we used to have a pizza date right beforehand. And my husband would go in the bathroom with the cup. He would come out, like the doctor would look at his sperm under a microscope, never once checked my body, would put it in me. I would expect to get pregnant after months of not working and writing checks. Like we started shots and it was crazy, but I didn't know. I literally, oh my gosh, my cousin's on from Israel, her mom. Okay. Um, okay. So all good. Anyway, so that was that. And my rabbi is on also, my rabbi star. So great. So fast forward, we're talking about a year into the journey, and I was working at a religious immigrant youth village as a development director, people poking my stomach because I was gaining weight from whatever medications I was taking, and nothing was working. People were like, come on, you know, you need to have a baby. It was like all the things that we talk about at nauseum happening to me, and I had nowhere to turn. I think at that time, you and I have spoken, like there was something called Baby Center, and we would like log on, and
Yep.
I couldn't relate. I'm like a Jewish woman living in northern Israel. Like I wasn't talking about it with anybody. It was all the roller coaster of emotions, but like I am the same personality type that you know now. I am on a mission. When I want something, I work really hard, and for the most part I can get what I want, and this was not working. It was driving a wedge between my husband and I. We were in therapy. He didn't know how to help me. It was really exhausting. Ultimately, after, feel free to interject.
I was gonna say, I'm just like taking a moment. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, the just like the way in which I can totally imagine. I think those of us who have this, passion and mission, we think that we're just gonna, if we work harder and we get to the best people and we do the best things, and we're like, you study hard for the test, you get the A, right? Like that's what happens. And here it just doesn't happen that way. Like you think you have control, but in actuality, you have no control. Yeah.
And it's looking back now, I can't believe I thought, like, I remember going to a wedding in New York and like not drinking because I was confident I was pregnant. It's like, it's such a mind F. Like, it
Totally.
really, and like looking back now, I'm like, Elana, like, I just want to hug that girl. That's a good therapeutic activity. But at that
Totally.
time, I like don't think I was processing
Yeah.
anything. Okay, so fast forward, we're going through a year and a half of this stuff. Finally, my husband and I are like, this is weird. We didn't know it was actually weird, but we're like, this is weird. And we were vacationing in Eilat with my mom and my grandmother, and they didn't know what was going on, and they surely were not going to ask. And I remember we missed our plane or something back to where we were supposed to go, and it was that I finally got this appointment with a doctor, and I was missing it. And that's when I broke down to my mother.
Oh God.
And ultimately, I got another appointment, and the doctor who looked at my body was like, your tubes are blocked. Like, I finally did a procedure and I had a diagnosis, and what a waste of energy and time. Like, what a year and a half. Oh my gosh.
I was gonna say, as a medical person, like I shudder every time I hear the story. I'm like, I don't understand how people like this exist, but I think this is part of like the fertility landscape where people like us, I mean, desperate to have a child, and when you don't know better, right? You just will do anything, whatever that anything means, but you'll do anything to have a baby. And so, yeah, yeah.
And I always talk about this as like, you know, it's miraculous. I found this doctor, he diagnosed me. He typed something on the computer. Oh, you're eligible for IVF. Okay. 3 months later, I went on to do IVF. My problem was not my eggs. I was able to retrieve a significant amount of eggs, turn them into embryos. Back then, we didn't test them.
Yep.
Also put in 2 or 3.
Yep.
And ultimately went on to have 2 children. They were both 2. They ended up in 1. I have an almost 13-year-old and an almost 11-year-old from the process. Beautiful, amazing. I am so lucky. We came back to America, and it was the first time I started talking about what I went through, because I realized I was not the only one in the world going through this. During that time, this is about 10 years ago, I started Jewish Fertility Foundation, and in my heart and soul, I knew I had more to offer. And I loved my kids, love my kids dearly. And this was really when I would say my struggle began, because I had these 2 amazing babies. I had extra embryos in Israel.
Okay.
And I had a family now supporting me. I wasn't like alone in Israel going through this. And I wasn't done. And how can you have children and want more and not feel grateful and all the emotions? And now I had people in my ears, my husband, like, let's just focus on the kids we have. My mom, like, just love the kids you have. Of course I do. But I ultimately went back and forth to Israel alone, leaving my family at home.
Oh,
and I was like putting in 2 or 3 embryos. Like, it was exhausting. And I was going back and forth, and that was a whole thing. But my husband and I did speak about, well, we always had this number 4 in our head, like 4 kids. And we did speak, even before we knew we had problems, about adoption. Wouldn't it be great to offer or open up our home to a family and a child who could use our support? Like, we feel so blessed and lucky. Let's do it. And
yep.
so we decided as a team, like, we were not going to we're now back in America with the crazy costs and expenses. We were not going to go through IVF again. And okay, I felt really.
And just to be clear, just to kind of like follow the line in the story, you were going back and forth to Israel, like transferring those embryos, but they weren't taking, like that wasn't
It
happening.
was
Okay.
not. I mean, I think I had like 23
Oh
embryos,
my
and I had,
gosh.
like, it was.
Sorry, say that point again, because I think the sound cut out. 23 embryos and
I have 2 children from that process.
yep.
So I did a bunch of transfers at the time. Again, we were putting, which is not recommended, 2 or 3 embryos in. Anytime I did that, it started as 2, ended as 1. And it was not working. Like, it was a stressful, exhausting process. Also, it wasn't working. And so we said, okay, we're done. But again, I'm on this
Yep.
mission, right? Like, I didn't care. Like, biology at that point didn't matter. I
Yep.
also, like, I had 2 great pregnancies. I really enjoyed giving birth. Like, I was like, I did it. It was an amazing experience, and I'm lucky. Also, I don't feel that desire to do it again. I felt like I could offer a child more.
Yep.
Um, and it felt very selfish, like really
Why?
selfish.
Why?
A lot of therapy, because, you know, it was hard to focus on anything else. As we know, when we're going through this, all I wanted was maybe to check that box that I could
Yep.
have a child. I felt very judged, even talking about it right now, that I had the blessing of these 2 kids and I still was on a mission. Like, that feels really selfish. It doesn't feel good. But I also knew what I wanted and what I could offer the world. And, like, at that time, I would have, like, kicked anything in my way, including my marriage. Like,
You
it,
know, go ahead.
yeah. Ultimately, though, okay, I was not going into Israel anymore. And we said, okay, let's look into adoption, right?
I'm gonna just stop you for a second, just for a second, because I just wanna I I think it's important to share, you know, what you experience and what so many people experience. is the real essence, the core of the difficulty of secondary infertility. Like, that's what it is. It is, it's amazing. They're amazing. I am so grateful. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And yet, and yet, I still want more. And and it's funny because sometimes people come to me and they have exactly what you just said, like this guilt, this shame of like, why should I be feeling all of this? I already have. And like look at all the people out there that don't have any children already. And how could I be feeling this? I should just be grateful. I felt it myself. Like you know, and many of the people out there know also my story. And I see Rena Bloom. Actually, Rena is a person who we've interviewed before, who had children by a surrogate because she went through a cancer experience and wanted to have more children. I went through it myself. I had 3 children, and then I wanted the 4th, the 5th, whatever it is. I wanted more, and I kept having second trimester losses, and I kept going, and I kept like, and people would say to me, my doctor even said to me, like, Aimee, you have 3 children at home, like, stop, enough. And I was like, no, but I want more. And like, so this is something that is very real, and I talk to people all the time, even people that have 5 kids, 7 kids, 10 kids, but they wanted whatever it was, one more, X number more. The feelings are exactly the same. It doesn't matter about the number. So I really wanted to give that to you. Like, I know you know this already, but to give this to you and give this to the audience, it's really important. All of you with secondary infertility, it's normal. It's okay.
But don't you, like, I still have that guilt feeling of people who are listening right now who don't have a child at home, right? Like, what a brat. I still have it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and right, like we can hold both. We can say it is awful and we are so grateful, and yet we also want more. Like, we can do both.
Thank
We
you
can
for
do
your
both.
permission. I
We
appreciate that.
can do both.
Okay, so my husband and I were on our next mission, right? I'm the driver again, and we're gonna adopt. We're gonna adopt a baby, right? Because people are like, just adopt, right? So it's got to be easy. And also keep in mind, at this time, Jewish Fertility Foundation's offices, we were renting space from a surrogacy agency and an adoption attorney. So
Wow.
like, and
Okay.
my office was right by the door. So pregnant women would come in all the time, and I'd be like, regardless. Okay, so that's just an aside. And we also, like, we weren't going to spend, you know how expensive it is. It's like 30, 40, 50. It's not like it's easy anymore. There aren't babies like on the street corner in the
Yep.
way that we think. International adoption is a challenge.
Yep.
And so I said, okay, we're living in Georgia. Let's try to go through the foster care system. Great. We are really going to be like altruistic, amazing human beings. And also, we keep Shabbat and we live in Georgia. And it was a challenge for us to find a course because you have to get certified. We weren't interested in becoming foster parents. We were only looking to foster to adopt. So
Okay.
that's a little bit different, but we had to ultimately pay for somebody to come to our house instead of going to the Saturday course.
Wow.
Again,
Okay.
it's always for hoops, but okay, cool.
Yep.
It took us like 8 or 9 months to be able to like become certified. Then you become home certified. You don't have to, like, if there is a network for you to be able to find a baby on your own, cool. You don't have to go through the foster care system.
Okay.
What we also learned throughout this process, which is a great learning tool, is that it was a 3-year waiting list for a baby in Georgia through the foster care system.
Wow.
I had to change my mindset and like, could I do that? And my husband was like, let's get a sibling unit, which is also a lot easier in some ways, or less time to get a sibling unit.
Meaning, just to be clear, meaning that there are siblings in the foster care system so that you would take multiple kids at once as opposed to just one, and maybe that's easier, like maybe that would move you up on the waiting list. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
We get a child under the age of 2 in addition to an older sibling unit, but the people we were working with were really explaining to us, like, you don't want to mess with the age order of your existing children. So like, we really, I think our oldest at the time was 6 or 7. Like we really had a limited window. We couldn't
Just tell me more about that. What do you mean?
I mean, the guidelines are you don't want to have a adopt a child who is older than your oldest child.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay.
There's
Okay.
lots. Listen, anybody in the foster care system is coming with some sort of trauma,
Right.
right? It,
Right.
it could be even the trauma of just the separation from the parent, you know, like, or it could be more severe. We understood what we were comfortable taking on. And my husband was really like, we have the ability, let's help a sibling unit. And like, he was focused. We were working with
Wow.
a team. Like, I was like, okay, I'm going to be this person. Okay. I can handle not having a baby. And this is months and, you know, we
Yeah.
were in the system. And then there was this moment of like, literally, Elana, it feels crazy. I don't want to say I was crazy, but I was like on this mission. I remember driving in the car to his office, pulling him out of a meeting in the hallway, sobbing and saying, I just want a baby. Like, I want to make my own. And this is after months of me like trying to convince myself that I am as special of a human as he is, wanting to be able to help, but also knowing realistically what I was capable of. You know, already having 2 kids at home, bringing on potentially 2 more who are going to have some sort of special needs.
Yep.
And special of a person. And I like wasn't like and that's okay. I'm not upset at myself for that part. I'm glad I learned that.
Yeah.
And I was like sobbing in the hallway, like at his office, right? At his office. And he's like, fine. And he always had this thing about his age. He didn't want to be an older dad. Whatever, that's his own stuff. And he's like, fine. Take 6 months and find a baby.
Wow.
Okay. Come on, I'm Elana. I run Jewish Fertility Foundation. I'm working out of an adoption attorney's office and a surrogate. Like, sure. So I like was on this mission. I had my home study, like my report. I sent it to all the NICUs. Like I was going to find a baby. I started to go onto the site called Adoptimist. I found birth mothers. I was like on a mission and totally failed. Like really failed. I remember I had a woman reach out and she's like, you know, do you have acreage for horses? And believe in Jesus. And like my kids' names are Avidan and Levi. Like, no, we don't. In the South, it's so hard. I mean, like just weird situations. And keep in mind, okay, this is like the point of the story, and we're like 20 minutes in.
We're good.
So keep in mind that, you know, I, similar to you, work with clients all day long within the Jewish community primarily, and they're going through their own infertility journey, mostly through assisted reproductive technology or IVF, and they're creating embryos. One of the things that I had been doing is literally acting as a matchmaker. And for so long, a matchmaker for embryos and intended parents, and saying, oh, you have embryos, you want embryos, let's put you together in a little bit more, you know, thoughtful way. But it was working. I had made a few matches. And my board chair at the time, who is a reproductive attorney, kept on saying to me, knowing what I was going through, she's like, Elana, like if you get a donated embryo, get pregnant, you can control that pregnancy. And I was like, no, it's fine. We're adopting, you know, we're good. And I can't believe it took this, because for months she was telling me this. And I was reading People magazine on Shabbat, and somebody spoke about embryo donation.
Wow.
And even though I was doing this, like something clicked. And I had this woman who was like very specific in what she was looking for. She wanted an open relationship. She had 2 embryos, a girl and a boy, which is not a significant amount of extra embryos. She had a list of like what she was looking for. And I kept on trying to make a match, and it wasn't going very well for her. And I was like, well, what about me? I do have a working uterus. Like I enjoy being pregnant. I can get pregnant. My issue was other issues. And I remember talking to my husband, and he's like, well, how much does it cost? And I'm like, well, it's significantly less expensive than adoption.
Yeah.
So literally in the span of like, it was the afternoon when I was reading, I picked up the phone and called this woman and I was like, what about me? And she's like, really? And done. It was not easy. It took a year before I had the embryos inside of me. But something felt right and I was able to receive those embryos.
Okay. I'm just like, I almost have chills, like just hearing this, like all of a sudden, just all of the things that were awful and were hard. And this was so easy, relatively speaking.
That
Like
part,
that part,
that,
right? So I now want to hear about the
yeah,
other part. Like why did it take a year?
sure. So I always, when I'm working with clients who are considering embryo donation, I talk about my own experiences. I'm not an attorney. I am not a doctor. I can share with you my personal experiences of what I've gone through and some of the best practices. People sometimes want, it's like dating. It really is the whole process, matchmaking and dating. This felt right with this other human being who gave me a gift. It felt right from the start because it was about our chemistry, our shared values, like our shared approach to this process. Not every single thing is the same. We're
Right.
not the same, but it felt right from the start. And the reason it took a year had nothing to do with us and our relationship, but there's certain steps that you have to take in order to literally get the embryos into your possession. And so she lives in a different state. She had these two embryos in order for, and I didn't know anything. I was kind of like working with my attorney, who I luckily had in my office, and getting advice from my doctor, but also like kind of navigating it by myself. This is already, my son is 5 now. So this is like 6.5 years ago that we started through this process. And even in that time, there's been a lot of new information and understanding how this process can go about. And I kind of felt like at my fertility clinic, it was the very first time that they had done this from an
Wow.
outside. It wasn't,
Right.
but it felt like every single new person I spoke with, from the finance team to the nurses, like nobody was ever on the same page. I had to explain it every time. And then ultimately go back to my doctor, who I had a relationship with. He was like my medical advisory council chair, and be like, your staff is not doing this necessarily the right way. A lot had to do with FDA testing. So keep in mind, which is exhausting,
Okay.
keep in mind that her embryos were created, I think like 2 years prior. So she was actually at this time pregnant with her second. And I mean, her embryos in her body, like it was already created, housed in a different state.
Yep.
So in order to transfer the embryos to my clinic, certain FDA guidelines and testing had to be completed, which I understand. You don't want to like contaminate the laboratory where all the magic happens. So she had to go through specific testing, like STD testing
Oh,
now, like,
wow. Wow.
which was crazy, but she did it. And keep in mind, the costs are all on the
Right.
recipient. So I'm paying for everything for her, which is just, I don't know if it's a have to do, but it's like common courtesy. Um,
Correct.
and so we had to deal with the medical, which every time we finished going through a hoop, we would have to do something else. It wasn't like, it was just exhausting. And I truly thought every month, like, this is just not going to work. It's just not going to work. So the medical component was exhausting. The psychological piece, we both were red flagged. And it doesn't mean, so you have to go through psychological testing, but I did feel like I was being assessed as a surrogate, not as somebody receiving
Oh,
embryos.
that's
The test,
so interesting.
keep in mind, we were on edge. This was already
Yeah.
exhausting, and that was like one of the last hoops. And unfortunately, my therapist at the time thought that her father, she misunderstood some information and thought that her father was an alcoholic. He was not an alcoholic. He was just not a great guy. But my husband and I were very clear, like, even if he was an alcoholic, what do we care?
Right.
Like, it's information. Also, keep in mind, we had just gone through a year-long training with the foster care program. And so, like, we were very open to a lot, because our mindset was like knowing already that an open adoption is the best for the child, that we could handle X, Y, and Z. Like, was the child, the child's biological mom on drugs or alcohol? Like, we knew our criteria going into this. And we were very quick to be like, we don't care if he was an
Yeah.
alcoholic. And that was not flying.
Yeah.
Also, the donor, who also had to do psychological testing, we had shared values, primarily Jewish values. And so our our answers to questions were similarly the same, like we had rehearsed them. So like if something was wrong with the baby or with me, abortion was not a problem. We were both okay as our religion told us to do. And that also felt weird to the psychologist. The whole thing was weird, and we were both red flagged. My doctor knew me. He's like, I've known you for years. Also, I have to follow the FDA guidelines. You unfortunately have to spend another $600 or whatever it was, $100, and you have to get another test. And I knew all these people. I had to like go at it. It was a whole thing. And again, it just like made us so angry and bitter and thought this was not going to happen. So anyway, these are the hoops that went along. Ultimately, I was able to bring these embryos to transfer them from the state that they were in. Some say you could do FedEx. That wouldn't be my recommendation after all of this, but it is doable. But there are some really great like cryo transportation shipping companies out there. You know, what's another $1,000? What's another $2,000 at this point? And ultimately, I received these embryos. In Georgia, I learned that the embryos still are hers until they're inside my body. And I got pregnant. I truthfully don't know what I put them both in because my husband sat me down and they're like, it's been how many years? Like, we can't do this with you anymore. Like, it was really not a good conversation. We joke about it now, but like, they're like, we can't, like, this is it. If this doesn't work, you are done. Like, we're done, you're done. And I don't like thinking about that because like, what if it didn't work? And I'm so lucky that it did work. Yeah. And so now I have my little cutie patootie who we love so much.
Elana, I'm just like, you know, it is so much to just like wrap your head around. And like, I'm just listening to you as you're sharing this and the way, like, all of these hoops, and then what if it didn't work, God forbid, and thank God it did. I'm okay. So I'm curious about the pregnancy in terms of your anxiety during the pregnancy. Like you said, like you did pregnancy well, but like what, knowing that this was sort of the last ditch effort, how were you during the pregnancy?
Well, keep in mind, I mean, I was running at this point Jewish Fertility Foundation. Like, I knew way too much at this. My sister was pregnant and my sister-in-law, both in Atlanta, and like everybody always wanted to take pictures, and no, I couldn't do that. Like, what if something went wrong? I don't want to. I was super private, superstitious. Also, like, I was working with clients. I felt guilty being pregnant. It was a different experience this time around. It was scary. Also, I felt very supported by the people around me, which was new to me during pregnancy after, IVF.
Incredible. And who knew that this was an embryo donation?
So I haven't stopped talking about it since I received it. So at this stage, I was an open book. And I'm not like, we didn't have, Instagram back then, like what, years ago. So, but everybody knew. My father, Israeli, like couldn't wrap his head around it. And he's like, and they already were prepared for adoption. So they knew we were open to any religion, any race. And my dad's like, well, what kind of kid are you carrying? Like, he was so confused and inappropriate. My grandmother still to this day is like, how's Matan's mom doing? And I'm like, no, there's a lot of education that goes along with it. But everybody knew. I mean, my kids were at that point, like, listen, they knew how they were created from a sperm and egg. From 2 years old, they were talking about embryos. So there was nobody we were not open about this with.
And what was there any discussion that you needed to have with your rabbi? Like, like, tell me about some of those conversations.
Oh, so I wasn't even, so keep in mind, the part of the reason that I chose this particular donor was because it was advised to us that the sperm be not Jewish. And she, as a single mom by choice, also was going in that direction. And so from a halachic point of view, I felt like, okay, I want to give this kid everything possible and make sure that they did, there were no questions. So I think I was like 8 or 9 months pregnant, and we started talking about the bris. And then I was like, oh, wait, is there any reason to dunk the baby for a Jewish conversion? And there were some questions, and this was really interesting. Have I shared this with you before?
No,
Okay.
no.
So I don't want to call anybody out, especially since I saw my rabbi on here. But
By the way, and I know your rabbi also very well and adore him. I keep going.
yeah. And so he was great. And also I was we have something called a yoetzet halacha, a woman who, you know, can answer certain questions around family issues. I reached out to her first. And I remember actually the forward was interviewing me at this particular time. So I was like, oh, I'll do a twofer. Like, what are they going to say about it? And also, do I need to dunk the baby? The response was that there were like 3 authorities in Israel who researched this. You actually don't have to dunk the baby if it's coming out of me. And it was also a Jewish egg. But one of the rabbis said, don't I sound religious? One of the rabbis said that just to be safe, why don't you dunk the baby without anything else? And for me, I'm like, oh, I'm such a rule follower. Let me go ahead. Okay, no problem. What I didn't realize is that I have a husband and now I have the donor. And they were like, both of them were like, hell no, we are not doing this. You have worked so hard for this. This baby is 100% Jewish. No. And then I did go to Rabbi Starr, and he's like, give me a second, did his research. And he's like, no, you're good. You're good. He's like, let me just see the donors, like, I don't know, a letter from the rabbi or something like that. So he did everything right. And it came up again like during the bris when I shared his name as Matan, which means gift in Hebrew. And I, of course, went into detail about the story. And I saw the rabbi and the Moa like looking at each other, and they're like, it's okay, it's okay. But I realized at that time, like, it is not only about me. Like, if it was just me, I would have done it. And that's been kind of the relationship throughout. Like, the donor and my husband are very similar in certain approaches relating to this process. I'm always very interested in like learning more about the sperm donor and like bio siblings, and the two of them are like have a very similar attitude around, you know, learning more at this stage when the children.
And so just to like take the continue the bris story, in Judaism, we name a child, basically we say the child's name and then we say Ben or son of, and then we use the father's name. So who was the father here? Like, what was the decision about who, like, what did Rabbi Starr say about that?
Are we like calling him out? Is he going to be upset? No, it's fine. So he's 100,000% my child. Like, there is no adoption. There's no birth order that needed to happen. For all purposes, he is our child. Like, no, there's nowhere, you know, when you're filling out forms or anything in today's day and age, like, we don't know, you know, in our lives, there are probably so many people who have used donor egg, donor, not like you're announcing it. There is our child. 100% in every way.
And but from a medical standpoint, because this is actually, so we interviewed earlier this week Lori Metz, who is a therapist who works in the donor conceived space, and she's actually pushing for national, maybe even international, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Compliance with having on everyone's medical records genetics, like, and what the story is. And she's one of the people that are advocating for that nationwide. How do you approach this from a medical standpoint with his doctors?
So I love talking about it. He loves talking about it. We do share it. I mean, it's really, so we're very, very open. I'm trying to think of a case where it mattered. I mean, his pediatricians, you know, when you're thinking about medical situations, like I'm very lucky that we have a very open relationship with his donor family.
Yep.
He has a full brother. There were some medical scares on their side. And like, you know, when if a kid has like ADHD, like, or ear infections, right?
Yeah,
I warned when I was pregnant, your kid is probably going to need tubes. I'm like, okay, like, I'm so sorry. Okay. Every kid has something.
exactly.
What thing is, all my kids, my other kids, biological kids need glasses. This kid needs glasses. And that was a shock to us because nobody on her side, we reviewed the donor's profile. Like nobody wears glasses. I don't know, things like
Hold on. I lost you for about 5 seconds there. Just the audio. Uh-oh. Okay. Okay, you're back now. Go ahead. Go ahead.
things come up all the time. I'm lucky that I have access to half of his medical information via a phone call. That isn't always common. There are, you know, I would love more medical information from the sperm donor. We do have a lot. It's important and it's interesting. Thank God we haven't really been in a situation where we needed that type of thing. But we tell anybody who it's important. Also, like Matan goes around and tells people, even when it's not relevant, that like he's a you know, he's from an embryo donor and that type of stuff.
And so last question here, and this is more about Matan. I mean, Matan is, you said he's 5, he's 6,
5.
right? And you know, what does he say? Like how did you, yes, you were open about it from the moment. Everybody knew when you were
Yeah.
pregnant. Everybody knew it's an open relationship, which not all embryo donations are open. And actually the next story that we're going to be talking about, that it is not an open situation. But here, how did you, you know, when you were like as he was growing up, like how did you bring that up with him? How did you integrate that into the story of his coming to be?
I mean, he met his biological siblings when he was, I don't know, 2 months old. So they're like
Which of course,
cousins.
well, I was going to say, which of course he remembers.
But we're going on a trip with them in 3 weeks. Like they're a part of our
Wow.
life. Um, you know, does he call them brother and sister? Not really. Like he calls them by their names. Um, but I also have 2 big boys who like to analyze all the science behind it and like want to understand, and they love talking about sperm and all that kind of stuff and eggs. You know, he knows that his donor, as he says, laid the egg, and
Oh, that's so great. I
they
love that.
with a he wants to know more about the sperm donor, which we're not really there yet. Fertilized it, and then I got this gift, and that's how he got his name. He knows a lot about biology, but he was like, "Yeah, I was an embryo." Like he's 5. He doesn't really understand, but there are absolutely no secrets. And I think it was never like I had to sit him down and explain how he came into our lives. Like, I mean, everybody knows that. I don't want to say he's our favorite child, but like he's the youngest one, and I don't know. He is everything to everybody. And I just think he feels how special he is and how much he was so wanted by everybody, that like it's just a story. It's who he is. And he's also like the most outgoing of my kids. And if he has a question, he asks it. But like, you know, at age 5, it's not a secret. So it's just he is.
Elana, I'm just, I knew pieces of this, but I did not know the totality of it. And I am just so taken by, I mean, you are so lucky. It is so, but you created, I mean, as much as we were talking about earlier in this conversation, right? That you can do and do and do and plan and plan and plan, and still, you know, you don't necessarily get the outcome that you expect or you hope for. But here in this specific situation, you created the environment to make him feel loved and feel special, and told him his story and how just the whole experience of the being open. I mean, it is not for everyone. Like I want that to be clear, right? It's not for everyone, and circumstances don't necessarily work out that way. But this is such a beautiful story of just coming into being. It is absolutely incredible. Okay, two very short, like last questions to
Yeah.
close. Um, Advice for people who are considering embryo adoption. What do you say?
Number one, don't
And
say, and you'll have a bunch of attorneys like knocking down your door. Donation.
okay, so like a two-part question, like one, like, general advice on what would you say to people who are considering it, and two, like, tell us kind of more about how you try to match people up, and what this kind of pet project of it is. And I love what someone just actually said here in the comments. She said, "Don't call it adoption because it's not." I love that. But go ahead, two parts. Go
So
ahead.
why it's not called adoption? You legally cannot purchase an embryo. It's kind of like a kidney. You have to donate this this embryo to somebody. It does cost money. There are other things associated with it, but it is not an adoption. So what would I say? Advice number one, oh my God, I wish I didn't wait 5 years to consider having my child. There are many things that you think about that worry about, before you meet this kid. And I'm sure there's going to be other things that come up, and, dynamics between the donor family. Like, I'm sure it's not going to always be, things are going to come up, of course, but none of the things that I worried about. And I really wish I had really taken this seriously and known about this prior, and considered it as an option. I do tell the clients that I'm trying to match that don't push it. Like, you're going to be in a relationship, whether you like it or not, in some form with this other family for the rest of your life. It doesn't mean you have to talk regularly or meet them or send them pictures. Like, you create your own relationship, and you can be really picky. Like, think of it like dating, right? So don't try to make it work if it doesn't feel right. And if you feel like your spidey senses, or like there are red flags, like, listen to yourself through this process. Your person is out there. I think that those, and like, know your boundaries. Like, if you don't want to donate to somebody who's a single parent by choice, or in a same-sex couple, or not do it, like, know what you want. And on the same way, know what you want. Like, I've had people reach out to me who only want, somebody who has their same political beliefs, or
Wow.
um, you know as extreme as that, to understanding what education this person has, to really wanting somebody with blonde hair and blue, like, really. But that's okay. You're allowed to want what you want, know
Yep.
what you want. I don't get into those weeds. I only just try to match you up based on um, availability of embryos, and then you have to do your own, like, medical and legal research.
And to be clear, the matching that you're doing, this like matchmaking shadchanis, let's call it, these are open adoptions. It's people who
I
know
will
both sides.
do, first of all, it wouldn't work because you have to meet the person, right? So I only fundamentally believe in open relationships. Again, you don't have to be best friends with this person, meaning your child and you have access to information, right? So medical information, understanding. We've learned now through the donor conceived community, like, we've learned we've made mistakes. So secrecy is a huge issue. So I don't support that, but I am very comfortable, basically introducing you, and then you figure out the rest.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Elana, I can't thank you enough. I'm It is so important to talk about all of these different ways to become a parent, right? And this is another one. And it is one that, like, with technology, is even more and more available and out there in today's day and age. That often people have extra embryos that they're not intending to use. And not all of those embryos like people want to give away, like, and that is absolutely totally fine. But if you do, this is an incredible opportunity for people who can't have children for whatever reason to be able to carry. And it's not adoption, it is not adoption, as we're all saying, but this is an incredible opportunity, and I'm so grateful for you for sharing your story. If people want to, like, we know that they can find you through Jewish Fertility Foundation, but if they want you specifically to discuss embryo adoption, how should they reach out?
So you can find me at Elana, ELANA, at jewishfertilityfoundation.org. Please type in the subject and make sure I make that a priority.
Yes, yes, like in the subject line in big letters in all caps, so that she doesn't, like, file it away, so it doesn't get lost in her inbox with all the other amazing things that she's doing. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye, everybody.
I appreciate it.